A new year is full of surprises, but one thing is always predictable: postage costs go up. Stamps.com gives you crazy discounts of up to 89% off USPS and UPS services. So when postage goes up, your business will barely notice the change. Stamps.com is like your own personal post office, wherever you are. You can even take care of orders on the go with the mobile app. No lines, no traffic, no waiting. Schedule package pickups, automatically find the cheapest and fastest shipping options, and seamlessly connect with every major marketplace and shopping cart. There's even a supply store where you can stock up on mailing supplies, labels, even printers. Stamps.com has been indispensable for over 1 million businesses just like yours. All you need is a computer or phone and printer. Take a chunk out of your mailing and shipping costs this year with Stamps.com. Sign up with promo code PROGRAM for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com code PROGRAM.
Hey! It's my song! Let's sing it! It's gonna be freaking awesome! Come on! It's gonna be freaking awesome! You know the words! It's gonna be freaking awesome! That's it! Say! It's gonna be freaking awesome!
Hello, everybody. It's Jesse Blaze Snider, the coolest geek alive. How are you? Hope you're doing good. Hope you had a good week. Hope you're ready for another fabulous edition of the coolest geek alive, where we are going to talk about something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time: the Marvel Brain Trust. Now, this was kind of unspoken, but there was credits to be seen. If you watch the early Marvel movies, you'll see a credit right at the beginning, or sorry, at the end of Iron Man, at the beginning of the credits, for like 5 people. I know most of the people here. On this list of Iron Man, under Marvel Creative Committee, you've got Joe Quesada, Craig Kyle, Dan Buckley, Alan Fine, and a guy named Sid Gaines. I don't actually know who Sid Gaines is, but I know who all these other people. Alan Fine and Dan Buckley are both publishers for Marvel Comics, people who work closely with Marvel Comics Publishing. Joe Quesada is the former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, but more than that, Joe is an artist and a writer in his own right. He is a brilliant, brilliant writer. He wrote an Iron Man story called The Man and the Iron Man, which is one of the best Iron Man stories I've ever read. I don't know why they haven't adapted it already, and I did actually hear rumors many years ago that they were talking about adapting it, that Iron Man 3 or Iron Man 2, any one of those other Iron Man sequels could have ended up adapting that story arc, and that would have been a really great idea. I think people would have been way more stoked about Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 if they had adapted a great storyline like that from the comic books. Joe Quesada can do no wrong in my eyes. Brilliant creative director. Joe Quesada is largely responsible for the Marvel Renaissance in comic books that I got to participate in when I started reading. I started reading monthly comics in large part due to the Marvel Knights promotion that happened sometime, I guess, in like the late 90s or early 2000s, where Joe Quesada and his buddy Jimmy Palmiotti, who had been collaborating with for a long time on independent books like Ash, they came over and they brought Kevin Smith to write Daredevil, and they brought in a whole creative suite of talent for 4 books in the Marvel landscape that were really street level and cool. And the books were Daredevil, Punisher, The Inhumans, and Black Panther. Now, 3 out of 4 of these books were groundbreakingly awesome. Black Panther by Christopher Priest is absolutely, I mean, granted, the book is a little bit better, but everything that you see in the Black Panther movie that is really freaking cool, and all that world building, that was done in this Marvel Knights series by Christopher Priest. That was the beginnings of the Black Panther that we know and love today, even though Black Panther was always a character that people loved. But Christopher Priest really brought something really cool to that book, and a great sense of humor to the book as well. Then there was the Inhumans book, which introduced the world to writer Paul Jenkins. Granted, he had written a few things here or there prior to that, but Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee on the Inhumans, oh my God. When that shitty Marvel Cinematic, Marvel TV produced Inhumans movie came out a while back, people like me were so disappointed because the Inhumans has been done so well a number of times in the comics, and there's a lot of source material to base a great film upon. And the fact that that didn't come together and happen was a devastating thing. But again, Black Panther, the Inhumans, and Daredevil by Kevin Smith, Joe Quesada, Jimmy Palmiotti. This stuff was amazing. Their fourth book, The Punisher, was a real disappointment. But the 3 hits out of these 4 was enough to get the Marvel Knights line to continue. Joe Quesada was eventually promoted until he became the editor-in-chief. And he was the editor-in-chief for, I don't know, I want to say almost like 2 decades or something like that. And was responsible for one wonderful... I don't want to say decision, because some of these decisions were probably made by publisher Dan Buckley or Alan Fine or any of these people. But he curated or he guided these things to success. Something like Ultimate Spider-Man, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which was going back to the source with Spider-Man, reintroducing the character as a young hero in high school, reintroducing all of his bad guys, eventually killing him and introducing Miles Morales into the world of the comic books. Brian Michael Bendis did this. He was a great writer, but Joe Quesada picked Brian Michael Bendis. Joe Quesada was overseeing these projects and making sure they came out right. Joe Quesada is probably one of the most brilliant, creative writers and producers in comics, period. I'm saying all this because when you see that name as a learned fan of comic books, you go, oh, thank God, they got Joe in there. Joe knows what he's doing. He knows these characters. He knows how to deliver them right and update them correctly, being faithful to the source material. Listen to Joe Quesada. I'll mention, too, Craig Kyle, because his name's not going to come up again, but Craig Kyle's on that list of the Marvel Creative Committee. Craig Kyle is a brilliant writer. Craig Kyle is most known, not that he's known enough for this, he should be. There was a run of New X-Men. I think originally it was launched as like X-Men Academy or something like that. The initial launch of this X-Men book was really weak. It was a really weak young X-Men title with new characters that nobody knew. But somewhere along the way, Craig Kyle came in as the writer, and he took over, and holy crap, what a great book that new X-Men book ended up being. I think there's a character from Wakanda named Gentle who was created in there. There was a great kind of rock dude who would disintegrate. He could throw his head around. These X-Men books that Craig Kyle wrote were creatively brilliant. He took characters that nobody knew and nobody cared about, and he made you care about them. Everything he ever wrote, I ate up. He's a brilliant writer. And I'll point to just an animated film. They made an animated film of Wolverine versus, and it included basically 2 parts. One part of Wolverine versus Hulk, one part of Wolverine versus Thor. Both of these things were written, one co-written and one fully written by Craig Kyle. If you've seen those animated films, you know this guy is awesome. So you've got 2 creative powerhouses on this initial team here, plus Dan Buckley, Alan Fine, people who are overseeing Marvel. And again, Sid Gaines, you know what, here, I'm going to pause real quick. I'm going to find out who Sid Gaines is. Okay, this is why I don't know who Sid Gaines is. He's a movie producer. He produced Big Daddy, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, Mr. Deeds, Master of Disguise, Aquila and the Bee. So he works with Adam Sandler's team a lot, and he's made a lot of movies. But he's not a comic guy. But meanwhile, we're talking Alan Fine, Dan Buckley. These are pillars of the Marvel machine. Alan Fine, I'm pretty sure, worked in the toy division at Toy Biz for Marvel back in the day. This guy knows what the fans like, knows what the fans want. Alan Fine, by the way, was allegedly, after being promoted to the president of Marvel Entertainment, he was reported to have left Marvel because of disputes with Kevin Feige. This Marvel Brain Trust that was, I don't know, kind of unspoken. You can't find credits for it everywhere, but the evidence that there was a Marvel Brain Trust can be found on Twitter and lots of other places where people like Brian Michael Bendis, who was part of this trifecta of a Brain Trust, have discussed that they wrote dialogue or scenes, made suggestions, important creative decisions that they added to the film process for the early, I'd say, first dozen films or so of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we're going to look at the specifics of that, like when did this start, when did this end? The initial Marvel brain trust is this bigger group of people, but this smaller group of Joe, Brian Michael Bendis, Dan Buckley, they become the new brain trust. And Brian Michael Bendis, for those of you who don't know, he is one of the hottest and most sought after writers of the 2000s. He had a very unique voice at the time, a gift for making things kind of light and fun, and reinventing some of the material in really interesting ways. When Brian Michael Bendis first came onto the scene, he was blowing people's minds. His Daredevil run, particularly with Alex Maleev, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce the guy's name, but oh my God, I'm a huge Daredevil fan. Daredevil's one of my favorite characters. One of the best runs on the character, hands down. You want a good comic book, especially if you're an adult, to go check out that will not let you down. Go pick up the volumes of Brian Michael Bendis' Daredevil. Actually, start with the Joe Quesada, Jimmy Palmiotti, Kevin Smith Daredevil, and go straight through to the next arc written by David Mack and a little arc written by Bob Gale, the creator of Back to the Future. And then it gets into Brian Michael Bendis. That whole run of Daredevil that started with Marvel Knights back in the day. I mean, Daredevil has essentially been in a renaissance ever since. There was like a weak section here, there, where Matt Murdock got possessed by a demon, but then shortly after that, the book got great again. There was another great run by Mark Waid. Joe Quesada and Brian Michael Bendis, they began this great creative renaissance on Daredevil. Granted, Frank Miller had already gone and done that, but the character of Daredevil had kind of waned in its popularity and the interest in that character, and they brought back eyes to that book, and that became the book to watch and the barometer for how good Marvel was doing at the time, if they really had their shit together. And Daredevil was consistently a bestseller, an acclaimed book all the time, while Joe Quesada was paying attention and working for this company. And Brian Michael Bendis was one of the people that he brought in. He brought in Brian on a number of occasions to do some great work. He was his pick for Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man was a huge hit for Marvel. And, people have been paying attention to comics for now, as what happens with a lot of Marvel creative people, not Marvel creative people, but creative people in general. Sometimes they kind of age out. They'll start kind of taking the wrong lessons from compliments on their work, and they become like a parody of themselves. And Brian Michael Bendis recently, he went over to DC, and he really did not do a great job over there. But this does not take away from the fact that Brian, he knows these characters really well. He's done some great work on them, and he's aware of the great work that has already been done on the characters. These are the types of creative people that you want behind the scenes in a writer's room at Marvel Studios. You need somebody like Brian Michael Bendis, like Joe Quesada, like Dan Buckley. And guess what? They've got more than just one somebody. They've got a few. When Kevin Feige got rid of this brain trust, and I pulled up an article from the time of some of the rumors that were going on of him slowly but surely ignoring them after Age of Ultron came out and was considered a disappointment by Disney, and that after that Feige went off the rails. And if you look at the movies that they made prior to this and around that time and now, you'll see a great gradual departure away from the source material and a renewed focus on sort of inventing things themselves. Like a movie that came out shortly after this was Spider-Man Homecoming. And for those of you who are fans, Spider-Man Homecoming bears no real resemblance to any Spider-Man story I have ever read in the comics. It's just its own thing. Own universe of characters. The MJ that we have, it's not really Mary Jane. There's no villains in that movie, that really fit. Like Vulture isn't really Vulture, even though Michael Keaton's great, but this is them doing their own interpretation of the Vulture and their own interpretation of Spider-Man. I think people forgave them at the time because this was the third kicking off of the Spider-Man franchise, and everybody was like, all right, well, we've seen all those characters. We just want Spider-Man back, and here he is, and he's fun, and he's light, and it's Tom Holland, and we love him. So, okay, we forgive this. But that was the beginning of Kevin Feige taking the Marvel Cinematic Universe off the rails and getting away from the influences of the source material that fans like you and I wanted to see. So, continuing on, there's a couple more pieces to this creative consortium as well that over time began to be ignored. And that includes the head of Marvel TV, which is Jeff Loeb. Jeff Loeb is a brilliant writer. I've heard Jeff Loeb derided because every now and then he can be a little hit and miss. Sometimes he'll put something out that's like not the best. But Jeff Loeb is probably responsible for more hit comic books. Hits, just hands down, that's a hit. From my favorite graphic novel of all time. I mean, my favorite Batman, but it's one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. The book that got me into Batman, the book that will get anybody into Batman, the book that Warner Brothers should have adapted so long ago. Batman, The Long Halloween. Jeff Loeb wrote Batman, The Long Halloween. A little bit more well-known from more recent times is Jeff Loeb also wrote Batman Hush. Jim Lee's highly associated with that book, but the mystery was written by Jeff Loeb. Jeff Loeb was responsible for introducing the Red Hulk, and that book wasn't the greatest book, but he is a elder statesman of Marvel Comics. He's made all of these great color books with his constant collaborator Tim Sale, who he did Long Halloween with, and also what was the one that I wanted to mention from Jeff Loeb? Jeff Loeb wrote Batman Superman with Ed McGuinness, which is I've talked about this before about how they screwed up Superman with the Man of Steel movie, and that if you make Superman too much like Batman, it fucks up the dynamics of every single character in the DC universe, because all of the DC universe personality dynamics are essentially based on the lightness and darkness of Superman and Batman. And that Superman and Batman lightness and darkness has been put on display best over and again by Jeff Loeb when he was working on Batman and Superman. So Jeff Loeb, another brilliant creative person. He's the head of Marvel TV. To a certain degree, probably the guy that we're blaming for why Daredevil was great, for why The Punisher was great, why Luke Cage was pretty good, why Jessica Jones was great. These people in these creative positions are very important, and they're often unsung. But somebody paying attention, we know who we're talking about. There's another person who is also allegedly involved, who rose to prominence after Joe Quesada left Marvel for hire. Well, he didn't leave Marvel. He just left Marvel Comics proper as he jumped up the ladder to be more a part creatively of the entertainment machine that Marvel became. So an editor known as Axel Alonso was brought up. I love Axel. I only know Axel a little bit. I almost got to work with him, and I was so excited and devastated when I wasn't able to work with him, but he just kept getting promoted sort of out of my reach. But I watched him rise to prominence at Marvel Comics after previously being one of the awesome editors responsible for so many of the great things that were coming out of Vertigo at the time. Axel was the editor of one of my favorite books by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, Preacher. Axel, he knows his stuff, man. He was the head of Marvel Comics, and apparently he had a little bit of creative influence and was making suggestions and whatnot for Kevin Feige. But eventually, as we'll see in this article I'm about to read to you guys, he stopped listening. So I pulled this up. This was an article from Bleeding Cool about just, let's see, this is in 2015. So seemingly not that long ago did this article come out. And it was called Welcome to Feige Island, Why Kevin Feige Canned the Marvel Creative Committee of Dan Buckley, Joe Quesada, and Brian Bendis. Okay, so in the article it says, I'm just skipping down. It says, quote, so it seems that this has all come to a head. Despite evidence to the contrary, it looks like Feige managed to blame Perlmutter, that's Isaac Perlmutter, who was an executive person who had been in control of Marvel for a long time. So this is saying that Feige blamed Perlmutter and anyone else outside of his division for any failure or mishap. And this failure and mishap is related directly to Avengers Age of Ultron, which was apparently considered not enough of a hit by Disney, I guess because it didn't gross more than the Avengers did. And so he was able to shut it down. It was the opening salvo in the war that last week saw Feige and Marvel Studios films taken out of Perlmutter's purview in favor of Disney. A lot of people were very happy about this at the time because Isaac Perlmutter was considered to be sort of a backwards thinking, maybe kind of Republican figure. I definitely heard stories about him being a bit difficult to get green lights for something like Black Panther, a property starring a minority, or something like Captain Marvel, a property starring a female. He felt that those things didn't really sell toys, and he was very money-minded, and everything was sort of like, no, that's not going to make money across the board. So he was somebody who you had to get past. He was gatekeeping essentially at Marvel and stopping certain things from getting made. As we can see, some of these female-led and Black Panther has been massive successes for the studios. So he wasn't exactly right. And Kevin Feige was fighting this guy. So at the time, it seemed like Kevin Feige had kind of like wrestled the old school ideology of an Ike Perlmutter to the ground. And now the Shining Knight was coming through, and he was going to be able to do what he really wanted to do the whole time. And it was kind of made all of a sudden around this time, they made it like he was the sole person responsible for the brilliant creativity that was coming out of Marvel. And that's just... I knew it wasn't true at the time, and I went, well, I don't know. I'm not in there. Maybe it is him. Maybe it's all him. I guess we'll see from now. And I've been paying attention since that happened, and I can tell you, the wheels just absolutely began to come off during this period of time. And I'm going to go through the timeline in just a second, but I just want to read the rest of this quote here. It says, "The bigger question is, how did Feige manage to strong-arm Disney into this decision? Because it has left him far more secure on Feige Island with less inconvenient critical voices. If Feige doesn't answer to Marvel, who does he answer to? As a former employee to Marvel's film division said to me, quote, if you want a target on your back, just say no to Kevin, end quote. Last week's move was not the end. It was not even the beginning of the end. But maybe, just maybe, it's the end of the beginning." I've got a little other piece of the article here, too. "I've heard conflicting reports that for some say 6 months, others a year to 2 years. Feige has been ignoring Marvel Creative Committee sessions and has been methodically cutting the committee out. Quote, suggestions is the operative word here. Feige, as the head of Marvel Studios, has always made the final creative decisions, but Avengers Age of Ultron brought things to a head. Full disclosure, I heard rumors long before the release of Avengers Age of Ultron that extensive and expensive reshoots on the movie could have been avoided if Feige had been receptive to notes. I couldn't get verification at the time, but in retrospect, the tea leaves seem to have fallen into place. Could it be that Feige doesn't want visible second-guessing used by the powers that be at Disney, especially when it's right? Oof, oof, oof. So, I mean, what is all this telling us? This is telling us that there's an ego battle that was going on the creative side of things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And Kevin Feige, who was always at the tippy top of it, but was very cleverly utilizing important creative people from the comics. Some of the greatest creative people to come out of Marvel at that time. Joe Quesada and Brian Michael Bendis in particular. Also Craig Kyle, who was in the early one. But Jeff Loeb, Axel Oz. These are pillars of the Marvel publishing world that made Marvel into a giant again. Hit after hit after hit, modernizing the properties in the right ways, honoring the past, and bringing the stories forward. These guys were really important for readers like me. When I saw their names in the credits for Iron Man and Hulk and all these early offerings of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I knew as a fan, wow, like there's a reason why these movies are good. Look who they spoke to. They spoke to the right people. But at a certain point in time, they weren't speaking to these people anymore. So I'm going to talk to you here like this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like in order, the things that they've released, okay? So these movies, all of these movies are under the creative influence of this Marvel brain trust, okay? Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, Avengers, Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the Winter Soldier, arguably the greatest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they made. Guardians of the Galaxy, another massive success. Avengers Age of Ultron. Okay, here's where the wheels fall off. But the wheels don't fall off until the movie's released, right? Avengers Age of Ultron. That means that the creative committee would have still been working creatively forward on the next movies. Like Ant-Man, we know that was in development for a long time with Edgar Wright before it actually came out. So Ant-Man, it comes after Age of Ultron, but that still would have the creative committee's stink on it. Civil War, Captain America Civil War, that would still have the creative committee's stink on it. Doctor Strange, which was, all these things were, I'm sure they had plans for a long time that would still have the creative committee's hands, part of it. So Ant-Man, Civil War, Doctor Strange. All right, now we get into where I believe the train begins to leave the station. The station of accuracy to the comics, things that are based on stories from the comics, things that hold true to the history of Marvel publishing. And it begins with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which we don't got to do too much work in making this exactly like the comics, because here we've got James Gunn. He's doing it. He loves these characters. He's trying to pull in Easter eggs. But at the same time, as we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Adam Warlock is nothing like Adam Warlock, and a lot of these characters are nothing like these characters are in the comics. Mantis, even though I love Mantis, I really do. Mantis is probably my favorite of the Guardians. She's nothing like that in the comics. That's her power set, and almost everything about her is just kind of made up for these movies, and James Gunn has been doing that. That is what you will see moving forward. A lot of the major creative decisions are being made now by the directors and by Marvel, the MCU. They're producing the films for themselves, not trying to bring to life storylines from the comics that their fans are clamoring for. Because what happens next? We get Spider-Man Homecoming, which is not an adaptation of anything from the comics. We get Thor Ragnarok, which very loosely adapts some elements from the comic books, but not in any way that really satisfies those things. Not to say, once again, I really like Thor Ragnarok. Like I don't really believe that they were screwing it up so badly at this point yet, but I do see signs that they are leaving the source material behind. After Thor Ragnarok, we get Black Panther. Again, Black Panther, I believe, probably has the fingerprints of the creative committee all over it. Granted, we do start to get into what might be called like intersectional politics and stuff, where all of these roads are meeting about inclusivity and all this stuff. So a whole narrative starts to develop from Black Panther, and Kevin Feige is very much at the head of that, wanting to be on the right side of history and all that stuff. And hey, I like to be on the right side of history too, but you got to be on the right side of history and also produce great movies that everybody loves. Everybody, you don't just go after one audience and lose the rest of the audience. That's just foolish. So we got Avengers Infinity War, which, 2 movies later is going to be Avengers Endgame, and obviously Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame. We've been building up to these movies. We've introduced Thanos in various movies prior, the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, the Avengers movie, and who was responsible for introducing Thanos and building this thing up? The Marvel Creative Committee, who are no longer there. But so they get those going, and now we got Ant-Man and the Wasp. Again, initial Ant-Man movie kind of has some basis in the comics. It's really a Bafo creative success. Ant-Man and the Wasp continues, but now we got Ghost in the movie. But Ghost isn't Ghost, it's a girl. It's some girl that we're going to make up, and she's got a backstory, and it's not the comics. Doesn't look like the comics, and a little gender swap going on. Okay, here's the beginning of things really starting to go off the rails. Next up, we got Captain Marvel. This is the first film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that basically crumples up the original origin of the character and throws it out the window. The original Captain Marvel, the Carol Danvers Captain Marvel is Miss Marvel. And she's not exactly like a sidekick to Captain Marvel, but she gets her powers from this Kree soldier, Captain Marvel, Captain Marvel. And there's a real classic story that, honestly, I don't think I've ever actually read. Maybe I've read an issue, like a reprinted issue. But Captain Marvel died, and Miss Marvel becomes the new Captain Marvel. And she's Miss Marvel for a long time. In like the 2000s, they upgraded her to Captain Marvel. And honestly, they were never exactly able to get the success with that character that they wanted. They realized that she was the, the namesake for the company. She is Captain Marvel. Perhaps we can use that to our advantage and build her up as a larger character. She could be a really nice, fresh face to represent the Marvel Universe. It's a woman, and, Marvel is male-dominated, so let's see if we can build her up. Now, they honestly never really succeeded with this in the comics, and they actually ended up taking the character to a really bad place when they did a follow-up to the Civil War, which the film Civil War is loosely based on. There's a sequel in the comics, Civil War II, and during that sequel, they have Captain Marvel essentially go full fascist, where she's working with the government as a goon for them and doing what the government tells her. Government says jump, and she says how high, and she becomes like a super Gestapo for the American government. And this was a really bad look for the character. It was very damaging to her, and she wasn't just exactly able to get a string of hit books. A lot of different writers tried. A lot of different takes on her and character designs were used, but it never quite worked. It just never clicked. Marvel and comics, they do this all the time. You're constantly launching things and then relaunching things and relaunching them and trying to see if you can get something to stick with the audience. And sometimes the companies will get a real bug up their ass about a certain character, like let's say Miss Marvel, the young Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan. She was one that Marvel was really trying to get going for a long time. And while the character has its fans, it never set the sales charts on fire. And neither did Captain Marvel. It was a bit of a difficult thing. But Captain Marvel did have some amazing history within Marvel Comics that could have easily been played up to make this really interesting. The cool thing about the original Iron Man movie is that they took essentially like 40 years of Iron Man comics that maybe were like good and bad, in the middle, but they took all the best parts and they stripped them right out, down to when the movie ends with him revealing his secret identity. Iron Man eventually reveals his secret identity in the comics. He didn't do it during the first story arc. For a long time, there was lots of stories where he was dealing with a secret identity. But that was a great moment when he revealed his secret identity in the comics because it made sense for his character. He was this playboy. He wasn't exactly Batman. He wasn't so brooding. He was more fun-loving, was ruled by his id, his ego, and it made sense for him to say, you know what, I want to be associated with this as a superhero. So things like that, things like Iron Man's origin in the cave and making the first Iron Man costume and then making his new show, like all of these little stepping stones to the character, they happened over a long period of time. But in the Iron Man film, it was all condensed down to something small. Now, they could have done something like that for Captain Marvel, because as simple as what I just discussed with Iron Man, there was wonderful history of Carol Danvers' relationship with the original Captain Marvel, this Kree alien, who ultimately dies in, I think, what was one of Marvel's first graphic novels, the death of Captain Marvel. It was a big deal at the time. I've not read that storyline myself, but I know enough about it from it being referenced that they could have introduced the original Captain Marvel, being true to the source material, and killed him dramatically in a first movie and had that movie end or turn with Carol Danvers having to step up and be the new Captain Marvel and save the day. That would have been great. people who went into Captain Marvel and saw this Annette Bening, this old lady, talking to Carol. She was dealing with the Kree Supreme Intelligence. For those of you who read the comics, the Supreme Intelligence of the Kree, it's like this collective hive mind thing, and it looks like kind of Jabba the Hutt with all these green tentacles coming out of the top of its head. Really, really cool visual. Something that could have hugely helped Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel could have really used some good set pieces. The set piece of the Kree's high intelligence and what that looked like. Oh my God. Really, really, really awesome. What a missed opportunity they had there, not including that. And a big missed opportunity they had not making Captain Marvel based on Captain Marvel. They actually turned Captain Marvel kind of into a bad guy through Jude Law, which, again, sending really kind of weird signals to the fans. And missed out on the opportunity to have him die dramatically in a satisfying fashion to adapt a famous classic story that many fans are very into. Like I said, I didn't read that one myself, but I know that the story has importance, and I'm sure that there was some great morsels of creativity that could have been pulled from it for that Captain Marvel movie. But they didn't do that. What did they do? They just kind of did what they wanted to do. They made their own Captain Marvel movie. They rewrote her history and started from there. And I tell you what, granted, Brie Larson hasn't necessarily done herself any favors in some of the ways that she's responded to these things, but that moment of getting rid of Captain Marvel and just doing Captain Marvel's origin any old way we feel, I really believe that that was the beginning of souring fans to what was going on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That is the beginning. I really do believe Captain Marvel is the thing you want to point to of like, oh shit, we've gone off the rails creatively. And at least, for me, when I saw that movie, I was like, uh-oh. Okay, so then we got Avengers Endgame. Clearly, this is the thing we've been building to for, decade at this point. The Marvel Creative Committee had their hands in that. But then we go Spider-Man Far From Home. Was a bit of a weirdo one. They say that the villains are the elemental. Granted, it ends up being Mysterio's the villain, and that is like a Spider-Man story, but it does very much seem to continue this idea of like, we're not really basing anything on anything. Like there's Molten Man's in that movie, kind of, except he's not. It's just an illusion. So it's a little bit of a bait and switch for the fans. The things that we want to see, like a Molten Man and Sandman or whatever, like we didn't exactly get them in this movie. Then we got the TV shows start kicking off. And the TV shows are a little bit of where we do have a little bit of comic book influence. I'll just blow through them real quick. WandaVision, not directly from the comics, but certain little aspects of the story from the comics. Loki, nothing to do with the comics. Nothing. What If, nothing to do with the comics. Hawkeye, some great specific elements from the comics. The introduction of Kate Bishop, Hawkeye. Moon Knight, some elements from the comics, but ultimately really just elements, not stories. There's nothing being adapted here that is like, oh man, they're doing that great Moon Knight story arc that I've been wanting to. Like, that's not what's happening. They're just taking little morsels. Miss Marvel, again, that too, little morsels. They changed her powers, they changed her look. So even people who are big fans of that character are seeing a different version of it. And then what? And She-Hulk. Oh my God, She-Hulk. Talk about abandoning the freaking source material. She-Hulk, just what a sham that damn show is. They didn't even look at the comics, I'm sure. They did whatever they wanted. Oh, and also the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which, again, has a couple little morsels of aspects of the comic books, but is not really adapting anything in particular from the source material. In fact, I think actually the Falcon and the Winter Soldier could have been really amazing if they had tried to adapt Truth. Truth was essentially a comic book that rewrote the history of Marvel Comics and said that there was an experimental program using African Americans to recreate the Super Soldier program sometime between World War II and when Captain America got unfrozen from the ice. Holy crap. If they leaned into that story more for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, that could have been really great and would have been really satisfying for people like me who have read those stories. Love that stuff. When I got my brother Shane into comics in the 2000s, I literally went through my collection and I pulled out everything that I thought was the best. I skipped over every story arc that I thought was boring, and I put them all in like the perfect, most satisfying order. And the Truth, that was in there. That Truth miniseries, that's a great miniseries. It's a great part of the Captain America mythology. Why not adapt that in a more meaningful way? They do have Isaiah Bradley, the the Black Captain America in the film, but just a little bit, just in a small way. And they introduced Patriot, but just a little bit and just in a small way. And that I don't really like either, because Patriot, when he was originally introduced in the Young Justice comics, he wore a mask over his face. You didn't know he was a black kid. You didn't know he was related to Isaiah Bradley. You didn't know any of these things. So now already they screwed up that reveal, the part of the mystery and the fun of the Young Avengers comic book, which is a brilliant, wonderful comic book written by Alan Heinberg and drawn by Jim Chang. Oh my God, like you just blew it. You just blew one of the first great things about Young Avengers. Boo. Okay. Anyway, so the movies from this Phase 4, right? We've got Black Widow, which has nothing to do with the comics, but there's a few things like thrown in there. We've got Shang-Chi and the rings, the 10 rings. Shang-Chi should have been a Bruce Lee movie. It should have been like an Enter the Dragon. It should have been small. It should have been just a badass kung fu movie, more like John Wick. If they had done that with Shang-Chi, it would have been amazing. Instead, it's just kind of like the first of what I would call generic Marvel movie. Like nowadays, movies come out from Marvel, and it just feels like another one of them Marvel movies. And it stinks because they were talking for a while about how they really need to differentiate and that Marvel had more genres to offer and they were going to demonstrate. Well, you could have demonstrated with Shang-Chi and making that a great kung fu movie. And then a couple movies later, you could have demonstrated it again with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. You could have made a great horror movie. But no, we're struggling with tone and all these things. Everything ends up becoming this weird shade of Marvel Cinematic Universe brown. So after Shang-Chi, you got Eternals. Eternals literally rewrites the comic visually, story-wise. It has almost nothing to do with the Eternals comic book. I don't even know why they would make it. Nobody was clamoring for it. If you were going to make it, you need to make it as a love letter to the pillars of the Marvel Universe. This is Jack Kirby's creation. It's a beautiful looking book, very interesting, and they could have leaned into that and made something really cool, but no, they just did whatever they wanted. You get Spider-Man No Way Home, which we're not going to give credit to Marvel for that because it's a Sony co-production, and man, that movie's great. Thor Love and Thunder. They bring in Gore the God Butcher, who is a great character from the comics, especially visually. They fuck up his visual. They fuck up his origin. They barely give you any real darkness, and we end up with this weird sort of rom-com about Thor being in love with his hammer, I think. I'm a huge fan of Taika Waititi, but they needed that Marvel brain trust overseeing, making sure that these things didn't go off the rails. People like me and you, we're fans of the source material. We're looking for them to take the source material and bring it to life, honoring that source material, not just do whatever the hell they want and call it Thor, you know? So then similarly, you got Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which could have been an adaptation of the comics or whatever, but Namor is nothing like Namor. Black Panther's not even in the movie. It essentially becomes this, Black Panther died little in-between issue of the comics. You know, it'd be a little mini-series after somebody dies where everybody's mourning the characters. And those books don't sell very well, the little mini-series that's just like taking us to the next stage of things. And this movie is kind of a weird one. It's not adapting anything that we care about. It's actually addressing real world death that went on. So again, now we've gone off the rails of the source material and we're just living in this celebrity world of we've made the Marvel Cinematic Universe and it's too big to fail. It's not too big to fail, as we can see. Finally, we've got Ant-Man Quantumania, which, again, Ant-Man is not known for fighting Kang the Conqueror, except when he's on the Avengers. That's not like a traditional Ant-Man villain. Oh, now he's going to go fight Kang. So that's not based on anything in the comic books either. And then we get finally to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is James Gunn wrapping up his whole universe, rewriting the origins and the things in any way he sees fit, which is okay once, you know, you trust the creative people and the audience has said, okay, I validate your version of these things. And with James Gunn and the Guardians of the Galaxy, we've definitely been given the thumbs up from the audience that we do generally enjoy what's going on here. But what do we see from that when we look back at this list of movies? It's largely that the only thing from this time that is really sort of true to form is Black Panther and the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame movie. Everything else starts to be its own thing creatively and fly away from the original source material. Meanwhile, you go back to before the creative committee broke up, and you've got things like Guardians of the Galaxy and The Winter Soldier. The Winter Soldier probably being the greatest adaptation of something from the comics that was done really well into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I would say that people love that movie. They think it's one of the best movies. The comics are better. Go read Ed Brubaker's Winter Soldier story arc. It's amazing. I forget who the artist on that was. I want to say like Michael Lark. There's probably a couple different artists on that book. But holy crap. I mean, I think it was at least like 25 issues. And it was so good. The movies are great too. Not as good. But they did make an effort to adapt it. And there's a lot of adapting of things going on in these early stages. Some very good adaptation. I mean, the Doctor Strange adaptation is really, really well done. Again, Doctor Strange is 3 movies after Avengers Age of Ultron, but I believe it has the Marvel Creative Committee fingerprints all over it. So let's talk about this in another way. Now, I'm not positive if I'm right here, but I believe that many years ago I heard them talking about the Marvel Creative Committee in positive terms, comparing it to Pixar's Creative Brain Trust. For those of you who are big Pixar fans, you might know about their creativity board that they have, which is filled with names that you might not know, but I know. And each one of these people is one brilliant force after another. And you can blame Pixar's incredible creativity on this creative process. Granted, things at Pixar have gotten a bit dicey over the past 5-6 years now, as John Lasseter was forced out of the company. It's a little fugazi why exactly Lasseter was removed. Granted, there's allegations that were made towards him, but they seem a bit flimsy. And I'm only here defending him on the level that he is one of the greatest creative people that we have on planet Earth. And if he does suck and he is mistreating people, that really is disappointing. I hope sometimes when I look at some of these things that it might just be more politicking and people trying to get him out of there, because he's moved on to other companies right now and he's already doing great work for them. But John Lasseter was the tippy top of the Pixar creativity, and he had a team of people that he was turning to on all these movies to look at it and give us feedback. And these guys were giving major notes that were changing the course of the films up until Toy Story 3. You're still hearing about some big note that Andrew Stanton or Pete Docter or whoever gave to change the course of the end of the film. So those people, you got Pete Docter, who made Monsters, Inc., Up, Inside Out, WALL-E. He's partially responsible for some of the Toy Story movies. There's a lot of overlap here with some of these characters. Andrew Stanton, they worked on some of these things together. Andrew Stanton's more associated with Finding Nemo, that franchise. And also, he's the one who did the live-action directing for John Carter, which I love the John Carter movie. If you saw that movie, it's great. It really bombed at the box office, but it's a great movie. If you've never seen John Carter, that's today's homework assignment. Go out right now and watch John Carter. The lead actor, Taylor Hitch or whatever, he was one of the guys from Friday Night Lights, which is a great show. But he's a little weak. But the movie itself is wonderful, and I highly recommend that one, based on old pulp comic books of the John Carter science fiction series, and really does some justice to that work. So Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird, who made Iron Giant, made the Incredibles films. He directed one of the Mission Impossibles for Tom Cruise. He made the Ratatouille movie. Brad Bird. We are talking about 4 of the most brilliant people who have created anything for Pixar. They said, oh, you're brilliant. Hey, you get to stay on the creative board. Oh, you're brilliant. You come stay on the creative board. You're brilliant. They collected brilliant people, and as they were making things, they presented their things to the creative people who were brilliant, and they said, what do you think about this, Pete? What do you think about this, Andrew? What do you think about this, Brad? And then they listened. They took their feedback and they listened, and they went back to the well, and the movies were better because of it. So this was the roadmap that Marvel was using with their creative brain trust. When they threw the creative committee out, I knew we were headed for a disaster. You know, I'm not a doomsayer, so I didn't like go out shouting, "Oh man, he's creatively bankrupt, that Kevin Feige. He's not responsible for nothing," because I didn't know for sure either, and I didn't want to jinx it. But this group of people, you can see in Pixar, like it's really easy to see how Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird, and John Lasseter together are helping make these movies great. Similarly, if you knew these names, when you look at these names, Joe Quesada, Brian Michael Bendis, Jeff Loeb, Axel Alonso, Jeff Buckley, these guys, they know comics. These guys are in the industry that we are adapting into film. That's the influence that you need on your films. People who have been paying attention to the fan experience. People who could tell you what the best-selling comics of all time are. People who can tell you what fans think of a property or what fans associate a property with, what storylines are associated with these characters. And to get rid of them in favor of, I don't know, some laissez-faire, I'm going to do whatever I feel. I really think it's a mistake. So, is Kevin Feige, the creative person, responsible for Marvel's success? I say clearly not. Clearly not. Since the duties of that creative position have fallen purely to him, and they've gotten rid of the creative consortium that was helping him behind the scenes, the comic book influence has gone away, and the adaptions have lost their connection to the source material. Now, because of all this, it has put Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in a really weird position. Of course, because of James Gunn's weird tweets and getting fired by Marvel and then rehired by Marvel and then eventually James Gunn leaving for DC during that time when he was fired, Marvel really put themselves in a weird position because this is James Gunn saying goodbye to Marvel, even though Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the preeminent Marvel properties. So this is the swan song to the Guardians of the Galaxy as we know them right now. But is it the swan song for viewers to the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole? As more and more announcements and things come out that fans just don't care about. Something like the Agatha Harkness series, which I think there's a chance that it might be great. It's based loosely on the Young Avengers Children's Crusade miniseries, which was written by Alan Heinberg, who's a writer for the OC, and he writes a lot of TV, but he's a brilliant comic book writer as well. So, that's a great basis that it's based on. But it's called Agatha Harkness. And, I'm not sure there's ever been an Agatha Harkness, even a miniseries or anything. There's certainly no series of Agatha Harkness. She's a character who's appeared in some books, but to give her own television series was a weird one, at least for signaling to the fans of what you're doing. Like a fan like me goes, "What are you doing?" The Echo series. Echo's now had maybe a mini-series here or there that haven't necessarily been particularly well received, though Echo as a character, when she was introduced during those early Marvel Knights comic books by David Mack, and I think maybe Brian Michael Bendis was working with him, that was great. She was great within the context of Daredevil, but an Echo series, what message are you sending to your audience? We don't really specialize in Echo series. We specialize in a Daredevil series, and Echo's a character in that thing. So they're really stretching credulity with some of these things, for the fans, for the audience, because the fans and audiences go, but what is that supposed to be? What is that about? Who said they wanted that? Who said they wanted this Marvel's movie where the three characters get pulled together into, that's not based on anything from the comics or based on some beloved storyline. There are beloved storylines that are still selling today, still selling graphic novels. They're selling thousands of copies, every month of certain storylines from Marvel Comics that are incredible, that could be adapted tomorrow. The original plan coming off of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was going to be that James Gunn was going to make a whole bunch of space movies and adapt a lot of the great storylines like Annihilation and other ones from the comics and bring them to life on the big screen. That's a good idea. The Infinity Watch and tons of miniseries and things that came out in the 90s that people love. Yeah, take that stuff and adapt it. Bring it to life. Do a good job with it. Not this thing where we're just kind of making it up as we go along. So in comic books, I don't know, I want to say 2 decades ago now, they started doing something that had been done for a long time, which was relaunching books with new number ones. But it became just like a thing that was being done on the drop of a dime to try to rebound sales numbers for books when they started losing sales. At a certain point, they would reboot the book and bring it back with a new number one. Now, series that were popular and growing in popularity and had good word of mouth, they would do okay with this relaunching thing. It would give everybody an opportunity to jump onto the book, and people would the sales would increase a little bit, not dramatically, but a little bit. And that number one issue in the middle, the sales would increase big time. But then normally the sales would kind of drop right back to where they were. However, over time, this relaunching strategy became a real big problem because the audience got used to it. And if a book was okay, and lots of the books where their sales were dropping, the sales were dropping because the book was just kind of okay. When they relaunched the book, readers took it as a good excuse to leave the title. So they wouldn't actually be buying the new number one. They would just go, this is a great place for me to stop reading. And speculators and other people, they'd buy number one, but they wouldn't buy number two. And the sales of number two would basically continue where the last series had ended off. And within a few issues, they'd be lower than they began, but prior to the relaunch. And I'm very nervous for Marvel that this is what they've done here. This is the situation that they're moving into now with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a really solid movie. It's different than the other Guardians of the Galaxy movies. It's not as fun. It's darker and heavier and whatever else, but the character stuff is great. It's entertaining. It's a little all over the place maybe towards the beginning, but it does come to a head and coalesce into something that's very satisfying and moving. I found myself crying a few times. I really don't want to give too much spoilers because it's early in the movie's run, and I think people should see it. But will this be the last movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that some people see? I think that it might be. Already I'm hearing rumblings from the geek world of like, all right, this is my last Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, unless I hear anything otherwise. I mean, look what comes next. The Marvels. This wasn't supposed to be the ordering of things. The ordering of the movies got all thrown out of whack. And oh boy, I think the Marvels coming after Guardians of the Galaxy is a real problem. Because even if, let's say, the audience isn't dropping off, the audience is going to drop off a little bit for the Marvels. That's my prediction. It's going the numbers on the Marvels are not going to be good. And then what is that going to say? Like, it's not going to look good. We're already on this downward trajectory. Guardians of the Galaxy is not making enough money. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 probably won't break $700 million. This should have been $1 billion movie. The fact that they've had to scale down their projections, and that I think they came out with like a million, no, sorry, 120 million or something. That's really little. I mean, for a Marvel Universe opening weekend for the final chapter in James Gunn's trilogy. We love those movies. Those movies are beloved. And we didn't show up for the third movie? What does this say? What does this say about the audience? They're leaving. Marvel Cinematic Universe is no longer the cool kids at the dance that everybody wants to know about. Nobody gives a shit anymore. And is that because there's nothing to give a shit about? Or is it because they've done such a shitty job getting us to this place that slowly but surely everybody went, all right, you know what? I don't think this is for me. But you know what? That's just my opinion. What do you think? Tell me. Write me an email at jessiblaze@jessesnider.com. Drop me a comment, subscribe, rate, like the show, do all the things. Tell your friends about it. And join us next Wednesday for another fabulous episode of The Coolest Geek Alive. I love you. Remember to watch John Carter. I think you will be very pleasantly surprised if you missed that movie when it came out at the time, directed by Andrew Stanton. He did a great job with that. And seriously, like, tell me, what do you think is going to happen from here? Do you think that the Marvel Universe needs a major, dramatic, creative shift back to the source material? That's what I think. Do you think that they're handling this stuff well? Do you have a different take on this that I might need to absorb? If I need to hear your opinion, please, jesseblaze@jessesnider.com. And if you want to get in on the ground floor of my book, King of Kings, which is going to be launching on Kickstarter in the next couple weeks, go to Kickstarter right now, type in King of Kings #1, and you can sign up for notifications the moment we launch that book. Anyway, I love you guys so much. I'm hoping maybe next Wednesday, the next episode of my series of interviews with my children will be ready. I have one that I did with my son Grayson, and if it's edited in time, I'm going to get that one out. But otherwise, yeah, I love you guys. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time on The Coolest Geek Alive. Peace! You've been listening to Coolest Geek Alive with me, your host, Jesse Blaze Snider. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more excellent geek culture content. Thanks for listening.
It's gonna be freaking awesome. Coolest alive. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Stay with your tribe. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Revenge of the Geeks. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Week after weeks. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Laughing with you. It's gonna be freaking awesome. And crying sometimes too. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Spilling it out. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Making you shout. I'm a genius. I got lyrics coming out me bum for days. You like that? It's a kazoo solo. Play that too. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Talking some shit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Living legit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Food in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Get in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Tell all your friends. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Call right on text. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Raising the bar. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Straight to the stars. It's gonna be freaking awesome. It's starting soon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Passing the moon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. On with the show. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Ready, set, go. It's going to be freaking awesome. Freaking awesome. It's going to be freaking awesome. Just wait. You'll see. You'll all see.